It was an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind that hums with the monotony of routine. I woke up to the faint scent of coffee brewing, courtesy of our programmable coffee maker, and the soft cooing of birds outside our window. My wife, Jessica, was already up, rushing through the house with her usual urgency. We've been married for 8 years, and I always thought our life was good. Sure, we had our disagreements and those occasional weeks where it felt like we were more roommates than a couple, but I figured that was just part of the ebb and flow of marriage. We had a 5-year-old daughter, Lily, who was the light of my life, and that morning, as usual, my priority was getting her ready for kindergarten. Jessica seemed stressed but waved it off as work-related. She worked in customer service and had recently taken on more shifts, though she never explained why. I didn't question it much, money had been tight, so I thought she was just trying to help out. She barely acknowledged me before rushing to her laptop, muttering something about an important delivery. I dressed Lily in her favorite unicorn pattern dress, packed her lunch, and made sure her hair was neatly braided. Jessica barely glanced at us as we left, but again, I didn't think much of it. She had her world, I had mine, and this was just life. As I buckled Lily into her car seat, she asked, "Daddy, why is Mommy mad all the time?" I froze. "She's not mad, sweetheart. Just busy," I said, trying to mask the unease creeping into my chest. Kids pick up on more than we realize. The drop-off went smoothly, and I spent a few extra minutes chatting with Lily's teacher before heading back home. But as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something strange. A white van with a courier logo I didn't recognize was parked outside. It wasn't the typical FedEx or UPS delivery. The driver, a tall guy in his late 20s or early 30s, was carrying a large box toward the house. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured Jessica had ordered something big, maybe a new appliance. But as I walked through the front door, I heard muffled voices. Jessica's laughter floated from the kitchen, light and flirtatious. The sound jarred me. I couldn't remember the last time she laughed like that around me. Curious, and maybe a little nosy, I walked toward the sound, stopping just before the kitchen entrance. I peeked in and saw Jessica and the courier standing close. Too close. The box he delivered, a microwave, it looked like, sat unopened on the counter. But instead of discussing the delivery, they were leaning in toward each other, their body language speaking volumes. Jessica's tone was teasing. "I don't know how I'm supposed to pay for this," she said, her voice dripping with faux innocence. The courier chuckled, brushing a hand through his dark hair. "I'm sure we can figure something out," he replied. The world tilted. I couldn't process what I was hearing. The easy banter, the casual touches, it all screamed intimacy. And then she said something that made my blood turn to ice. "Well, maybe there's another way." I stepped back, my heart racing. A mix of anger, confusion, and disbelief swirled inside me. Was this really happening? In our house? While I was gone for just 20 minutes? I wanted to storm in there, demand answers, and throw the guy out of my home, but something stopped me. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the realization that I needed to see more before confronting her. Either way, I turned and quietly slipped out the front door. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just a hunch or suspicion anymore, this was real. My wife, the mother of my child, was cheating on me. And I had no idea what to do next. I drove around aimlessly for nearly an hour, my mind a chaotic swirl of thoughts. The image of Jessica standing so close to that guy replayed in my head like a cruel loop. Her laughter, playful, almost giddy, was a sound I hadn't heard in years. Not from her. Not with me. When I finally returned home, the courier van was gone, and Jessica was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. The new microwave sat proudly on the counter, plugged in and ready for use. "Hey," she said, glancing up at me briefly before returning her attention to her screen. "How was drop-off?" "Fine," I replied, my voice tighter than I intended. She didn't notice. I hovered in the kitchen, staring at the microwave like it was some kind of cursed artifact. My fist clenched involuntarily. I wanted to ask her about the courier, about the weird exchange I'd witnessed, but I didn't know how to begin. And what if I was wrong? What if I'd misunderstood the whole thing? I couldn't exactly accuse her of cheating based on a snippet of overheard conversation. "Everything okay?" Jessica asked, finally looking up from her phone. Her tone was casual, but I detected a hint of annoyance, like I was interrupting something important. I forced a smile. "Yeah. Just a long morning. That night I couldn't sleep." Jessica seemed completely unfazed, scrolling through social media in bed before turning out the light and rolling over without a word. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Was this just paranoia? Or was my gut telling me something I didn't want to face? The next day, I decided to take a personal day from work. After dropping Lily off at kindergarten, I parked down the street and waited. If the courier returned, I wanted to see for myself what was going on. Hours passed, and nothing happened. I started to feel foolish, like some conspiracy theory nut sitting in his car with a coffee cup and a pair of binoculars. But then, just as I was about to give up, the white van appeared. My stomach dropped. The courier got out, carrying nothing this time, no box, no clipboard. Just his smug, confident stride as he walked up to my front door and knocked. Jessica answered almost immediately, greeting him with a smile that felt too familiar. They talked for a moment before she stepped aside and let him in. I sat there, frozen, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. This was it. Proof. Whatever was happening between them wasn't a one-time thing. I felt like an idiot forever giving her the benefit of the doubt. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes, the courier emerged. Jessica followed him to the door, laughing again, her hand resting briefly on his arm before he walked back to his van. She didn't even bother to hide it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I stormed out of my car and up to the house. Jessica was still standing in the doorway, watching the courier drive off. When she turned and saw me, her smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of guilt, or was it irritation? "What are you doing home?" she asked, her tone defensive. "Funny," I said, my voice shaking. "I was about to ask you the same thing. Who's that guy?" Jessica's eyes darted to the van, now disappearing around the corner, and then back to me. She crossed her arms. "He's just a delivery guy." "Why?" "Really?" I said, stepping closer. "Because he didn't look like just a delivery guy. And what was he delivering this time, Jessica? Or are you paying him some other way now?" Her face hardened, and I saw the walls go up. "Don't start with this," she snapped. "I don't know what you're implying, but you're being ridiculous." "Ridiculous?" I laughed bitterly. "I saw you. Yesterday. Today. I heard what you said to him, Jessica. Do you think I'm stupid?" Her expression faltered for a second before she regained her composure. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice icy. "You're being paranoid." "Am I?" I shot back. "Then tell me why he was here, why you were flirting with him, why you're acting like this is no big deal." Jessica sighed, rolling her eyes. "It's nothing. He's just friendly." "Stop blowing things out of proportion." The sheer audacity of her dismissiveness made my blood boil. "Friendly? That's your excuse? Jessica, you were all over him. And what, you've been spying on me now? Is that how little you trust me?" She folded her arms, deflecting like a pro. "I wouldn't have to spy if you weren't sneaking around," I shouted, my voice cracking with the weight of everything I'd been holding in. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The house was silent except for the distant hum of the new microwave. Jessica's face twisted into a mask of defiance. "You're being crazy," she said finally, her voice low and venomous. "Nothing's going on, and if you can't see that, maybe you need help." I stared at her, stunned by the sheer gall of her response. My heart pounded, my mind racing with anger, hurt, and disbelief. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the woman I thought I knew. Unbelievable. I muttered, turning away. Absolutely unbelievable. I needed to cool off, to think. So I grabbed my keys and left without another word, leaving Jessica standing in the doorway, her arms still crossed, as if she'd won some twisted argument. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I spent the rest of the day driving aimlessly, trying to process what had just happened. Jessica's complete dismissal of my concerns wasn't just infuriating, it was terrifying. It felt like she was gaslighting me, trying to make me question what I'd seen with my own eyes. But I wasn't imagining things. I knew what I'd witnessed. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a diner and sat there for a while, staring at the peeling paint on the building and sipping a cup of bad coffee. I needed clarity. A plan. Something to ground me in reality. Jessica wasn't going to admit anything willingly, that much was clear. If I wanted answers, I'd have to find them myself. I called in a favor from my friend Mike. He worked in IT and had helped me set up our home Wi-Fi a few years back. If anyone could help me dig into Jessica's digital footprint without raising suspicion, it was him. I didn't give him all the details, just told him that I thought Jessica was up to something and I needed to check her phone and computer activity. Man, this sounds messy, Mike said, his voice laced with concern. You sure about this? Positive, I replied. I don't want to be blindsided anymore. By the time I got home that evening, Mike had sent me instructions to install monitoring software on Jessica's devices. I felt a pang of guilt as I set it up. This was my wife, the woman I'd vowed to trust and cherish. But she'd shattered that trust, and now, I needed to protect myself. The next few days were a mix of anxiety and dread. Every time Jessica's phone buzzed or she disappeared into another room to take a call, I felt my chest tighten. She was still acting normal, laughing with Lily, complaining about work, going about her daily routines as if nothing had changed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was a facade. Then, the software started to deliver results. The first thing I found was a text thread between Jessica and the courier. His name was Ryan. The messages were casual at first, filled with the kind of small talk you'd expect between acquaintances. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. Their conversations became more flirtatious, more personal. And then I hit the mother lode, a message from Ryan sent the morning after the first delivery I'd witnessed. Last night was fun, winking face. Same time next week? I felt my stomach drop. There it was. Proof. No more speculation, no more benefit of the doubt. Jessica was cheating on me, and she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. I kept scrolling, my hands shaking as I read through weeks of messages. They'd been meeting regularly, sometimes while I was at work, other times when I was running errands or taking Lily to school. The audacity of it all was staggering. Jessica had built this elaborate lie right under my nose, and I'd been too blind to see it. But it wasn't just the affair that sickened me. It was the way she talked about me to Ryan. She complained about my long hours at work, my boring personality, and even accused me of being too emotionally distant. As if her betrayal was somehow my fault. By the time I finished reading, I was trembling with rage. My marriage wasn't just on the rocks, it was a shipwreck, and Jessica had set the explosives. I needed a way to confront her that she couldn't wriggle out of. No more denials, no more accusations of paranoia. I wanted the truth, and I wanted her to feel the full weight of what she'd done. The next day, I arranged for Lily to stay with my mom for the weekend. I didn't want her anywhere near the house when the inevitable confrontation went down. Once Lily was safely out of the picture, I prepared for the showdown. I printed out copies of Jessica's messages with Ryan, highlighting the most incriminating parts. I even flagged the dates to show how often she'd been sneaking around. Then I set up my laptop in the living room and queued up a recording of their most recent phone call, one I'd captured using the monitoring software. When Jessica came home that evening, I was waiting for her. She looked surprised to see me sitting in the living room, a stack of papers on the coffee table and my laptop open beside me. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice tinged with annoyance. "Sit down," I said, my tone cold. "We need to talk." Her eyes narrowed. What now? Are you still stuck on that delivery guy nonsense? I don't think it's nonsense, Jessica, I said, gesturing to the stack of papers. In fact, I think it's time we clear the air. She hesitated for a moment before sitting down, her arms crossed defensively. Fine. What do you want to talk about? I slid the first page across the table, the text where Ryan talked about their fun night together. Jessica's face paled as she read it, her confident posture faltering. Where did you get this? She demanded, her voice trembling. Does it matter? I shot back. I've got everything, Jessica. The texts, the calls, even the dates you met up with him. So don't even think about lying to me again. She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off by hitting play on the recording. Ryan's voice filled the room, smooth and cocky as he joked about their next rendezvous. Jessica's face turned beet red, her hands clenched into fists. That's enough, she snapped, reaching for the laptop. I grabbed it before she could touch it. No, Jessica. It's not enough. I want to hear it from you. How long has this been going on? How could you do this to me? To Lily? Her lips trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might break down and confess. But then her expression hardened. This isn't what it looks like, she said, her voice rising. You've been spying on me? Invading my privacy? How dare you? I couldn't believe her audacity. Don't you dare turn this around on me. I had every right to know the truth. The room fell silent, the tension between us thick enough to choke on. Jessica looked away, her jaw tight. Finally, she whispered, I didn't mean for it to go this far. Her words hung in the air like a confession, but they didn't feel like the closure I needed. You didn't mean for it to go this far? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. Jessica, this wasn't some accident. You made a choice. Over and over again. She looked at me, her eyes welling with tears, but I wasn't sure if they were tears of regret or just frustration from being caught. I didn't know how to tell you, she said softly. You've been so distant, so wrapped up in work. I felt alone. Alone? I scoffed. You felt alone, so you decided the best solution was to sleep with the guy delivering our microwave? Are you kidding me right now? She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I needed her to feel the same sting I'd felt every time I uncovered another piece of her betrayal. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said, her voice breaking. Ryan was just, I don't know, a distraction? Someone who made me feel wanted again. Wanted? My voice rose, my anger bubbling over. Do you think I don't want you? Do you think I spend all those late nights at work for fun? I'm trying to take care of this family, Jessica. I'm trying to give you and Lily a good life. I know, she whispered, her tears falling freely now. I know. And I hate myself for what I've done. I swear I didn't mean to hurt you. I stared at her, trying to find some hint of the woman I fell in love with, the woman I thought I knew. But all I saw was a stranger who had taken our life together and smashed it to pieces. You didn't mean to hurt me? I said, my voice quieter now but no less cutting. Do you even hear yourself? You lied to me. You cheated on me in our house, while I was out taking care of our daughter. How do you justify that? She didn't answer. Instead, she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly drowned out by the overwhelming weight of betrayal. I want the truth, I said firmly. How long has this been going on? Jessica wiped her eyes and looked at me, her expression a mix of guilt and exhaustion. A couple of months, she admitted. It started when Ryan delivered the microwave. He flirted with me, and I don't know why, but I liked the attention. It felt good to have someone notice me again. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Notice you? Jessica, I notice you. I've always noticed you. But I guess that wasn't enough. She didn't reply, just sat there staring at the floor. I felt my anger rise again, fueled by her silence. So what now? I asked. Were you planning to keep this going? To keep lying to me while you snuck around with him? No, she said quickly, shaking her head. I was going to end it. I swear I was. I didn't know how. I laughed bitterly. Yeah, because cheating is the easy part, right? It's cleaning up the mess that's hard. Jessica winced but didn't argue. I'm sorry, she said again, her voice trembling. I know I messed up. I know I've hurt you, and I hate myself for it. Sorry doesn't fix this, I shot back. Sorry doesn't undo what you've done. She nodded, tears still streaming down her face. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I'll go to counseling. I'll cut off all contact with Ryan. Just, please don't give up on us. Her plea hung in the air, but I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that she was truly sorry and that we could somehow salvage what was left of our marriage. But a part of me couldn't shake the image of her and Ryan together, the lies she told, and the way she tried to gaslight me when I confronted her. I don't know if I can, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can forgive you for this. Jessica sobbed harder, her hands clutching at the edge of the couch like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Please, she said again, her voice breaking. Please don't leave me. I turned away, unable to look at her anymore. My mind was racing, my heart aching with a mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. How had we gotten here? How had the life we built together fallen apart so completely? I need time, I said, my voice hollow. I need time to figure out what I want, because right now, I can't even look at you. Jessica didn't say anything, but her sobs followed me as I walked out of the room and into the night. The cool air hit me like a slap, but it wasn't enough to clear my head. I needed space. I needed answers. And most of all, I needed to decide if this marriage was even worth saving. I drove to a nearby park, the one where I used to take Lily to feed the ducks on weekends. The air was cold and still, and the only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hum of passing cars. I sat on a bench by the pond, staring at the rippling water, trying to make sense of everything. Jessica's tears had seemed genuine, but so had her lies. How could I trust her now, after everything she'd done? And even if I could forgive her, would I ever be able to move past the betrayal? The thought of her with Ryan made my chest tighten with anger and heartbreak all over again. I pulled out my phone and scrolled aimlessly, hoping for some distraction. Instead, I found myself opening a new post on Reddit's relationship advice subreddit. It felt ridiculous, venting my feelings to strangers on the internet, but I didn't know where else to turn. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I tried to figure out how to start. Finally, I just let the words spill out. My wife cheated on me with a delivery guy. I found out by accident, and now my whole world is upside down. She's apologizing, begging me not to leave her, but I don't know if I can ever forgive her. How do you even begin to move on from something like this? I hit post and stared at the screen, feeling both foolish and desperate. Within minutes, comments started pouring in. Some were sympathetic, others blunt. A few people shared their own experiences with infidelity, while others urged me to leave Jessica immediately. The mixed advice didn't give me any clarity, but it was oddly comforting to know I wasn't alone. One comment stood out though. Get your ducks in a row. If she's truly remorseful, she'll agree to counseling and full transparency. But don't make any decisions while you're still in shock. Take your time and remember, you deserve honesty and respect. I read the comment over and over, letting the words sink in. It made sense. I couldn't rush into a decision, not when my emotions were still raw. But I also couldn't let Jessica off the hook. If she was serious about making things right, she'd have to prove it, not with words, but with actions. The next morning, I returned home. Jessica was in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and looking like she hadn't slept all night. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she didn't meet my gaze as I walked in. I stayed up thinking, she said softly, breaking the silence. I know I have no right to ask for another chance, but I want to try. I want to fix this. I set my keys on the counter and leaned against the wall, studying her. If you mean that, then we need to set some ground rules. She looked up, her expression a mix of hope and apprehension. Okay. Whatever it takes. First, I said, my voice firm. You cut all contact with Ryan. Block his number, delete his messages, everything. I don't want him anywhere near you, or this house, ever again. Jessica nodded quickly. Done. I'll block him right now. Second, I continued, we go to counseling. Together. If you're serious about fixing this, we need professional help. She hesitated for a moment, but then nodded again. I'll make an appointment. And third, I said, my voice hardening. Full transparency. Your phone, your emails, your social media. I want access to everything. No more secrets. This time, Jessica didn't answer right away. She stared into her coffee, her hands trembling slightly. That's fair, she said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. Is it? I challenged. Because if you can't agree to these terms, there's no point in even trying. She looked up at me, tears brimming in her eyes again. I'll do it, she said, her voice breaking. I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't feel relieved or reassured. If anything, her compliance felt hollow, like she was agreeing out of desperation rather than genuine remorse. But it was a start, and I needed to see if she could follow through. The following week, we had our first counseling session. The therapist, a calm and empathetic woman named Dr. Harris, started by asking us to explain why we were there. Jessica hesitated, glancing at me nervously, so I took the lead. She cheated on me, I said bluntly. With a guy who delivered a microwave to our house. And I don't know if I can ever trust her again. Dr. Harris nodded, her expression neutral. Thank you for being honest. Jessica, would you like to share your perspective? Jessica looked down at her lap, her voice barely above a whisper. I messed up. I made a horrible mistake, and I hurt the person I love the most. I don't know how to make it right, but I want to try. The session was uncomfortable, to say the least. Jessica admitted to feeling neglected and unappreciated, while I vented my frustration at her lack of communication and her betrayal. Dr. Harris encouraged us to focus on rebuilding trust, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the damage was already done. When the session ended, Dr. Harris gave us some homework, to write letters to each other, expressing our feelings without interruption or judgment. Jessica seemed eager to comply, but I felt skeptical. Could a letter really undo the pain she'd caused? That night, after Jessica had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper in front of me. Writing about my feelings wasn't exactly my strong suit, but I figured I'd give it a shot. The words came slowly at first, but eventually, the floodgates opened. I wrote about the anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak. I wrote about how much I loved her, and how much it hurt to see her throw it all away. And I wrote about Lily, how I didn't want her to grow up in a broken home, but also how I didn't want her to think it was okay to settle for a relationship built on lies. When I finished, I folded the letter and placed it in an envelope, unsure if I even wanted Jessica to read it. But one thing was clear, I couldn't keep all this pain bottled up forever. I needed to let it out, even if it didn't change anything. The next morning, Jessica slid her letter across the table. Her hands were shaking, her face a mask of anxiety. I wrote it last night, she said softly. I tried to be honest. I stared at the envelope, debating whether to read it right then or save it for later. Curiosity won. I opened the letter and began to read. Her words were raw, filled with guilt and regret. She admitted she'd been selfish, that she'd let her insecurities and loneliness drive her to do something unforgivable. She apologized for the lies, the deceit, and for putting me in a position where I had to question everything about our marriage. But there was one part of the letter that hit me harder than the rest. I still love you, and I hate myself for betraying you. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Not because I want to erase what I've done, but because I want to be better, for you, for Lily, and for myself. The words felt sincere, but sincerity wasn't enough to fix what she'd broken. Still, it was the first time I'd seen a glimmer of the woman I fell in love with, buried beneath layers of bad choices and lies. "Thank you for writing this," I said, my voice flat. "I need time to process it." Jessica nodded, looking down at her coffee. "Did you write one?" she asked hesitantly. I slid my letter across the table without a word. She unfolded it and began reading, her expression shifting with every line. By the time she reached the end, tears were streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." I didn't respond. Instead, I stood and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her guilt. The next few weeks were a blur of counseling sessions, tense conversations, and awkward attempts at normalcy. Jessica threw herself into proving her commitment, blocking Ryan, giving me access to her phone, and even deleting her social media accounts. On the surface, it seemed like she was making an effort. But beneath it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. One evening, I decided to test her. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I needed to know if her remorse was genuine or just another act. While she was in the shower, I opened her phone and checked her messages. Most of them were mundane, conversations with coworkers, updates from her family. But there was one message thread that caught my eye. It was with her best friend Amy. The most recent message was innocuous enough. "Thanks for listening. I really needed that." But as I scrolled back through their conversation, I found something that stopped me cold. Amy had known about Ryan. She'd known about the affair from the beginning. There were messages where Jessica confided in her, talking about how exciting it was, how it made her feel alive again. Amy had encouraged her to end it, but the fact that she'd kept Jessica's secret, and by extension, Ryan's, felt like another betrayal. I put the phone down, my stomach churning. Jessica wasn't just lying to me, she was dragging other people into her web of deceit. How could I trust her when she couldn't even be honest with her so-called best friend? That night, I confronted Jessica. She was sitting on the couch, watching a reality show, when I walked in and turned off the TV. "We need to talk," I said, my voice tight. Her face immediately clouded with worry. "What is it?" "I read your messages with Amy," I said bluntly. "I know she knew about Ryan." Jessica's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked like a deer caught in headlights. "You went through my phone?" she asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and indignation. "Don't even start with that," I snapped. "You lost the right to privacy when you decided to lie to me." "Why didn't you tell me she knew?" Jessica hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. "I didn't think it mattered," she said finally. "Amy didn't approve of what I was doing. She told me to stop. But she didn't tell me," I said, my voice rising. "She kept your secret, just like you kept Ryan's. How am I supposed to trust you when you're still hiding things from me?" Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel any sympathy. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't want you to think even worse of me." I laughed bitterly. "Worse? Jessica, you've already destroyed our marriage. What could be worse than that?" She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I was done playing the understanding husband. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," I said, my voice cold. "Every time I think we're making progress, I find another lie. Another secret. I'm tired, Jessica. I'm tired of fighting for something that might not even be worth saving." Jessica sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't give up on us." I stood there, staring at her, my heart torn between anger and heartbreak. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that we could somehow rebuild what we'd lost. But another part of me knew the truth, that some things, once broken, can never be made whole again. The morning after our blowout, I made a decision. I needed space. I couldn't keep waking up every day, staring at Jessica, and pretending things could go back to normal. "I think we need to separate," I said over breakfast. The words felt like lead on my tongue, heavy and final. Jessica froze, her coffee mug halfway to her lips. What? She asked, her voice breaking. I need time to think. I continued, trying to keep my tone steady. Time to figure out what I want, what we want, if there's even anything left to save. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't waver. It's not forever, I added, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed that. Just for a while. Jessica nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. Okay, she whispered. If that's what you need. I spent the next few days making arrangements. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, close enough to see Lily regularly but far enough to get the distance I needed. Jessica agreed to stay in the house, and we worked out a schedule for sharing time with Lily. It was awkward and painful, but it was the only way I could see forward. The apartment was quiet, eerily so. At first, I welcomed the solitude, using the time to reflect on everything that had happened. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence became suffocating. I spent my nights replaying old memories, wondering where it all went wrong. I thought about the early days of our marriage, when Jessica and I couldn't keep our hands off each other. Back then, we talked for hours about everything and nothing, dreaming about the life we'd build together. How had we gone from that to this? The guilt crept in too. Had I been too focused on work? Too blind to her unhappiness? I hated that part of me still wanted to shoulder some of the blame, even after everything she'd done. But the truth was, our problems didn't excuse her choices. She'd had plenty of chances to talk to me, to tell me she was struggling. Instead, she chose to betray me. Despite the separation, I made a point of seeing Lily as much as possible. She was too young to understand what was going on, but she sensed the tension. Why aren't you and Mommy living together? She asked one night as I tucked her into bed at Jessica's house. We just need some time apart, I told her, trying to keep my voice light. But we both love you very much. She nodded, her little face serious. I miss you. I miss you too, sweetheart, I said, my heart breaking. Seeing Lily reminded me of what was at stake. Whatever decision I made about my marriage, I couldn't let it affect her any more than it already had. She deserved stability, love, and honesty, even if Jessica and I couldn't give it to her together. One evening, as I was packing up some of my things from the house, I stumbled across something that reignited all my anger. It was a small notebook tucked away in Jessica's nightstand. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The pages were filled with Jessica's handwriting, notes, thoughts, and confessions. Some of it was mundane, like grocery lists and reminders. But toward the back, I found entries about Ryan. He makes me feel alive again. I know it's wrong, but I can't stop. What if this is what I've been missing all along? My hands shook as I read the words. Even now, after everything, she still hadn't told me the full extent of her feelings. She'd downplayed the affair, acting like it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment. But these entries painted a different picture, one where she saw Ryan as an escape from the life we'd built together. When Jessica came home that night, I confronted her. What is this? I demanded, holding up the notebook. She looked at it, her face draining of color. You went through my things? She asked, her voice shaking. Don't you dare turn this around on me. I snapped. You've been lying to me this whole time, and now I find out you were practically fantasizing about leaving me for him? Jessica burst into tears, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to leave you, she sobbed. I was just confused. I didn't know what I wanted. That makes two of us, I said coldly. But at least I had the decency not to lie and cheat while I figured it out. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I realized something. I couldn't keep living in limbo. The separation had given me time to think, but it hadn't brought me any closer to a decision. And now, with the notebook, I felt like I was back at square one, angry, betrayed, and unsure of what the future held. I needed closure, one way or another. Whether it meant ending the marriage or giving Jessica one last chance, I couldn't keep dragging this out. It wasn't fair to me, to Jessica, or to Lily. The next morning, I called Jessica. We need to talk, I said. For real this time. Her voice was quiet. Okay. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop halfway between my apartment and the house. It was neutral ground, somewhere either of us could feel completely at home. Jessica arrived first, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea. She looked exhausted, like the weight of the past weeks had taken a toll on her. I slid into the seat across from her and wasted no time. We can't keep doing this, I said, my voice firm. Living in limbo, avoiding the real conversation. It's not helping anyone. Jessica nodded slowly. I know, she said. I've been thinking a lot, too. Then let's lay it all out, I said. No more half-truths, no more deflections. I need to know exactly what this affair meant to you and whether you're truly ready to fight for this marriage. Because if you're not, I'm done. Jessica flinched at my words but didn't argue. Instead, she took a deep breath and began to speak. It wasn't love, she said, her voice trembling. It wasn't even about Ryan, not really. It was about me. About feeling like I wasn't enough, like my life wasn't enough. I got caught up in this fantasy that he represented something better, something exciting. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to listen. And what about me? I asked. Was I not enough for you? Her eyes filled with tears. You are enough. You've always been enough. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. I let my insecurities take over, and instead of talking to you, I made the worst decision of my life. I stared at her, searching for any sign of deceit. Her words sounded genuine, but how could I trust her now? How could I believe anything she said after all the lies? Why didn't you just come to me? I asked, my voice breaking. Why didn't you tell me how you were feeling? Jessica shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. Because I was afraid. Afraid that you wouldn't understand. Afraid that you'd see me as weak or ungrateful. Her confession hit me like a gut punch. I had spent so much time focusing on my anger that I hadn't allowed myself to consider her perspective. It didn't excuse what she'd done, not by a long shot, but it gave me a glimpse of the cracks that had formed in our marriage long before Ryan entered the picture. Here's the deal, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. If we're going to try to fix this, I need total honesty. No more secrets. No more lies. And I need you to put in the work, counseling, rebuilding trust, everything. If you can't commit to that, we're done. Jessica nodded quickly. I'll do it, she said, her voice desperate. Whatever it takes, I'll do it. And Ryan? I asked. Have you spoken to him since we started this mess? No, she said firmly. I blocked him the day you asked me to. I haven't contacted him, and I won't. He's out of my life. Her answer was what I needed to hear, but it didn't feel like enough. Not yet. One more thing, I said. If I ever find out you've lied to me again, about anything, we're done. No second chances. Jessica nodded again, her face pale but resolute. I understand. We left the coffee shop with a tentative plan, counseling twice a week, regular check-ins about how we were feeling, and a commitment to complete transparency. It wasn't a guarantee of success, but it was a starting point. As I drove back to my apartment, I felt a strange mix of emotions: hope, fear, doubt. Could I really move past this? Could I ever look at Jessica the same way again? Only time would tell. For now, I was willing to try. Not for Jessica, and not even for Lily, but for myself. I needed to know that I had done everything I could before walking away. That evening, as I settled into my apartment, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Hey, it's Ryan. We need to talk. My heart stopped. How had he gotten my number? And why was he reaching out now? I stared at the message, torn between ignoring it and confronting him head-on. Whatever he wanted to say, I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. I stared at the message, my chest tightening with anger. After everything, the last person I wanted to hear from was Ryan. The thought of him involving himself in my life again made my blood boil. But curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know why he was reaching out. "What do you want?" I typed back, my fingers trembling with rage. His reply came almost immediately. "This isn't what you think. Can we talk in person? It's important." I debated ignoring him, but something about his insistence made me pause. If he had something to say, I wanted to hear it, if only to close this chapter for good. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of controlling the narrative, but I also didn't want any loose ends hanging over my head. "Fine," I replied. "Tomorrow. Neutral place. 10 a.m. The next morning, I arrived at the park where I had agreed to meet Ryan. It was the same park I'd taken Lily to countless times, and the familiarity of the setting made the situation feel even more surreal. Ryan was already there, leaning against his van, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets. He looked nervous, which was a small victory in itself. Good. Let him squirm. "What do you want?" I asked, walking up to him and keeping a safe distance. "You've already done enough damage." Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now, but I needed to tell you the truth." I crossed my arms, unimpressed. "The truth? A little late for that, don't you think?" "I know," he said quickly. "But there's more to this than you realize. Jessica, she didn't tell you everything." My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression hard. "What are you talking about?" "She came onto me first," Ryan said, his voice low. "I'm not saying I'm innocent, I messed up big time, but I didn't pursue her. She made the first move." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I'd spent weeks blaming Ryan, imagining him as the instigator, the predator who lured Jessica into betraying me. Hearing that she might have initiated the affair made the betrayal cut even deeper. "You're lying," I said through gritted teeth. "You're just trying to save your own skin." Ryan shook his head. "I swear I'm not. Look, I've got messages, one she sent me before this whole thing started. If you don't believe me, I'll show you." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through it before holding it out to me. I hesitated, my mind racing. Did I really want to see this? Did I want more evidence of Jessica's betrayal, more reasons to question everything I thought I knew about her? Curiosity won out. I took the phone and read the messages. They were casual at first, small talk, light jokes, but then I saw the shift. Jessica had been the one to cross the line first, sending flirty texts that became increasingly bold over time. I handed the phone back, my hands shaking with anger. "Why are you showing me this now?" I demanded. "What do you even want from me?" Ryan shrugged, his expression oddly sincere. "I just thought you deserved to know the whole truth. I know I screwed up, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't want you to think it was all me." I stared at him, my anger bubbling over. "Get out of here," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "If I ever see you again, I swear." He nodded, cutting me off. "I get it. I'll stay away. For what it's worth, I'm sorry." I didn't respond, just turned and walked away, my mind spinning. The truth he'd revealed didn't change the fact that Ryan had been complicit in destroying my marriage, but it added another layer of betrayal I hadn't been prepared for. That evening, I called Jessica and told her to meet me at the house. She sounded nervous, and for good reason. When I arrived, she was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice hesitant. I dropped my keys on the counter and leaned against the wall, my eyes boring into hers. "I talked to Ryan." Jessica's face went pale. What did he say?" "He showed me the messages," I said flatly. "The ones you sent him before this whole thing started. You didn't just cheat on me, Jessica. You pursued him." Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't in the mood for more excuses. "Why didn't you tell me the truth? You've been sitting here, playing the victim, acting like this just happened. But you made a choice, Jessica. You chose to cross that line. I didn't mean for it to go that far," she said, her voice trembling. I was just. I don't know. I was looking for something, anything, to fill the emptiness I felt. Empty? I snapped. You felt empty, so you decided to blow up our marriage? Do you have any idea how selfish that is? Jessica broke down, sobbing into her hands. I know, she cried. I know I messed up, and I've been trying to make it right, but I can't take it back. I can't change what I did. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or even sadness. I just felt tired. Tired of the lies, the excuses, the endless cycle of betrayal and regret. I don't know if I can do this anymore, I said quietly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I don't know if there's anything left to save. Jessica looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Please, she whispered. Please don't give up on us. I stared at her, my heart aching with the weight of everything we'd been through. But I didn't have an answer, not yet. After the confrontation, I left Jessica sitting at the kitchen table, her sobs echoing in the background as I walked out the door. I couldn't stay there, not that night, not with the weight of everything Ryan had revealed pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. I drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring together, as I tried to make sense of it all. Jessica's actions had already torn me apart, but knowing she had initiated the affair added a new level of betrayal. She hadn't just fallen into something, she had actively sought it out. And for what? To feel alive. To fill some emptiness she never thought to share with me? I ended up back at my apartment, staring at the ceiling for hours as questions raced through my mind. Could I ever forgive her? Did I even want to try? And what about Lily? No matter how much Jessica had hurt me, I couldn't ignore the fact that she was Lily's mother. Our decisions would shape her life, too. 2 days later, we had another counseling session. I debated skipping it. What was the point, when my mind was already half out the door? But something pushed me to go, if only to see if Jessica was willing to face the truth. Dr. Harris greeted us with her usual calm demeanor, but even she seemed to sense the tension radiating between us. Let's start with an update, she said, folding her hands. How have things been since our last session? Jessica glanced at me, her eyes pleading. Not good, she admitted. We've hit another roadblock. That's one way to put it, I said bitterly. Ryan told me Jessica was the one who initiated the affair. Dr. Harris raised an eyebrow, her gaze shifting to Jessica. Is that true? Jessica nodded slowly, tears already pooling in her eyes. Yes, she whispered. It's true. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Why did I have to hear it from him? I was ashamed, Jessica said, her voice breaking. I didn't want you to hate me more than you already do. It's not about hate, I snapped. It's about trust. And you keep giving me more reasons to believe I'll never be able to trust you again. Dr. Harris held up a hand, signaling for us to pause. This is obviously a very emotional topic, but let's try to unpack it calmly. Jessica, can you explain why you reached out to Ryan in the first place? Jessica hesitated, wiping her eyes. I was lonely, she said finally. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter anymore. Ryan paid attention to me, and I let myself believe that was what I needed. And now? Dr. Harris prompted. Now I know how wrong I was, Jessica said, looking at me. I know I destroyed the one thing that mattered most, our family. Her words sounded genuine, but I couldn't shake the bitterness in my chest. Do you? I asked. Because it feels like you're only sorry because you got caught. Jessica flinched, but Dr. Harris intervened before she could respond. It's clear that there's a lot of pain and anger here, she said gently. But if you're both committed to moving forward, we need to focus on rebuilding trust. That's assuming there's anything left to rebuild, I muttered. Jessica turned to me, her eyes wide and desperate. Please, she said. Give me one more chance. I'll do whatever it takes. I looked at her, at the woman I'd loved and trusted for so many years, and felt the full weight of the decision I had to make. Could I really forgive her? Could I ever look at her the same way again? That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at an old photo of Jessica, Lily, and me from a vacation we'd taken years ago. We looked so happy, so carefree. It was hard to reconcile the smiling woman in the photo with the one who had betrayed me so completely. I thought about Lily, about how much she loved her mom and how devastated she'd be if our family fell apart. But I also thought about myself, about the life I wanted, about the respect and honesty I deserved. Staying for Lily's sake wasn't enough. If I chose to stay, it had to be because I believed we could build something real again. By the time the sun rose, I'd made my decision. Jessica came over to drop off Lily before work. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept at all. After Lily ran off to play in the other room, Jessica turned to me. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I nodded, gesturing for her to sit. The silence between us was heavy as we stared at each other, neither of us sure how to start. "I've thought about everything," I said finally. "And I've made a decision." Jessica held her breath, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I'm willing to try," I said, my voice steady. "But this is your last chance. If I catch you in one more lie, about anything, it's over. No discussions, no second chances." Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she whispered. "Thank you. It's not going to be easy," I continued. "I don't trust you right now, and I don't know when, or if, that trust will come back. But I'm willing to take the first step, for Lily's sake and for ours." Jessica reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Don't," I said firmly. "We're not there yet." She nodded again, her face crumpling with emotion. "I'll prove it to you," she said. "I promise." I stood and walked to the other room, where Lily was playing with her dolls. "Hey, kiddo," I said, scooping her up into a hug. "You want to go get some pancakes?" She giggled, wrapping her arms around my neck. "Yes." As I carried her out the door, Jessica stayed behind, her tears falling silently. It wasn't a happy ending, not yet. But it was a beginning, and for now, that was all I could offer. The first few weeks after our decision to try again were tense, to say the least. Every interaction with Jessica felt like walking on eggshells. She was overly cautious, watching every word she said and every move she made, while I was hyper-aware of everything, searching for signs of dishonesty or lingering secrets. We started attending counseling twice a week, and while the sessions were helpful, they were also emotionally exhausting. Dr. Harris encouraged us to focus on small victories, moments of honesty, acts of kindness, and steps toward rebuilding our connection. But those moments felt few and far between. The hardest part was letting go of the need to check up on her constantly. I hated how much space Ryan still occupied in my mind, like a ghost haunting every corner of our marriage. I wanted to believe Jessica had truly cut him out of her life, but trust wasn't something I could summon on command. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Jessica's phone buzzed on the counter. My heart raced as I glanced at the screen. It was just a notification from her mom, but the sight of her phone still filled me with dread. She noticed me looking and picked it up, her expression wary. "You can check it if you want," she said softly, holding it out to me. I hesitated, torn between the desire for transparency and the fear of becoming the kind of person who constantly snoops. Finally, I shook my head. "No. I don't want to live like that." Jessica nodded, but the tension between us was palpable. "I don't either," she said. "But if it helps you feel better, I don't mind." "It's not about feeling better," I said, setting the dish towel down. "It's about knowing that I can trust you again. And right now, I don't know if I can." Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. "I'll keep proving it to you," she said. "Every day, if I have to." A few weeks later, we had our first good day in what felt like forever. It started with a family outing to the zoo, Lily's favorite place. Watching her feed the giraffes and giggle at the penguins was a welcome distraction from the heaviness that had consumed our lives. Jessica seemed lighter, too, smiling more freely and engaging with both me and Lily in a way that felt genuine. For a few hours it was almost like we were a normal family again. That evening, after Lily was in bed, Jessica and I sat on the couch, sharing a bottle of wine. It was the first time we'd spent time alone together without the weight of our problems looming over us. "I miss this," she said quietly, her eyes meeting mine. "Just being with you, without all the mess." I nodded, taking a sip of wine. "I miss it too. But it's going to take time." "I know," she said. "And I'm willing to wait." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. That flicker of hope was extinguished the next day when I received an unexpected email. It was from Ryan. The subject line read, "One last thing." Against my better judgment, I opened it. The message was brief but infuriating. "I know you're trying to work things out with Jessica, and I respect that. But there's something you should know, she didn't tell you everything. If you ever want the full truth, you know how to find me." I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. What was he trying to do? Stir the pot? Plant seeds of doubt? Or was there really more to the story than Jessica had admitted? I closed the email without replying, but the damage was done. The questions Ryan had raised buzzed in my head like a swarm of angry bees. What hadn't Jessica told me? And why was Ryan so determined to keep himself involved in our lives? That evening, I confronted Jessica about the email. Her face went pale as I read it aloud, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse. "I swear," she said, her voice trembling, "I've told you everything. I don't know what he's talking about." "Then why is he still trying to contact me?" I demanded. "Why won't he let this go?" "I don't know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Maybe he's just trying to mess with us. Maybe he can't stand the fact that I chose to stay with you." Her explanation made sense, but it didn't quell the nagging doubt in my mind. Ryan's words had planted a seed of suspicion, and no matter how much I wanted to believe Jessica, I couldn't ignore the possibility that there was more to the story. Over the next few days I wrestled with what to do. Part of me wanted to confront Ryan, to demand answers and put an end to his interference once and for all. But another part of me knew that engaging with him would only make things worse. In the end, I decided to focus on Jessica. If there was more to the story, I needed to hear it from her, not from Ryan. But how could I get her to open up if she was still holding back? At our next counseling session, I brought up the email. "I need to know if there's anything else she hasn't told me," I said, my voice tight. "Because I can't keep going if there's still more to uncover." Dr. Harris turned to Jessica, her expression calm but serious. "Is there anything else you'd like to share?" Jessica hesitated, her eyes darting between me and Dr. Harris. "I've told him everything," she said finally. "I don't know why Ryan is doing this, but I have nothing left to hide." Her words sounded convincing, but the doubt lingered. Was she really being honest, or was this just another layer of deception? After the counseling session, I drove home in silence, Jessica sitting beside me. Her insistence that she had nothing left to hide sounded sincere, but Ryan's email continued to gnaw at me. If there was truly more to the story, I wasn't sure I could handle uncovering it. But the uncertainty of not knowing was almost worse. That night, Jessica tried to bridge the distance between us. She sat next to me on the couch, her hand lightly resting on my knee. "I don't know how else to convince you," she said softly. "I've told you everything. I've done everything you asked. What more can I do?" I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean into her touch either. "It's not about what you can do," I said, my voice heavy. "It's about whether or not I can believe you." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she got up and went to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts. A few days later, I received another email from Ryan. This one was even shorter than the last. "You should ask Jessica about the trip to Clearwater. Good luck." Clearwater. The words sent a jolt through my chest. Jessica had gone to Clearwater for a weekend conference a few months before the affair came to light. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. She'd mentioned it in passing, saying it was a work-related event and that she'd be sharing a hotel room with a coworker to save on costs. Now, the memory felt like a trapdoor opening beneath me. I didn't tell Jessica about the email right away. Instead, I did some digging. I searched through old emails, texts, and receipts, looking for anything that might confirm or contradict Ryan's insinuation. I found the hotel booking confirmation, her flight itinerary, even a photo she'd sent me of the view from her room. Everything seemed normal, but that only made me more suspicious. If she'd been hiding something, she wouldn't have left obvious clues behind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan was trying to tell me something important. That evening, I sat Jessica down in the living room. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tentative. "Ryan emailed me again," I said, watching her carefully for a reaction. Her face went pale, and she shifted uncomfortably. "What did he say?" "He said I should ask you about Clearwater," I said bluntly. "So I'm asking, what happened on that trip?" Jessica's eyes widened, and for a moment I thought she might deny everything. But then her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. "It wasn't what you think," she said. "I swear it wasn't." "Then tell me what it was," I demanded, my voice hard. "I ran into Ryan at the hotel," she admitted, her voice trembling. "It was a coincidence. He was there for a delivery, and I happened to see him in the lobby." "Go on," I said, my stomach twisting. "We talked for a bit," she continued. "Had a drink at the hotel bar. But that was it. Nothing happened." "Nothing?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're telling me you just happened to run into him, had a drink, and left it at that?" Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know how it sounds, but it's the truth. I didn't even think to tell you because it felt so insignificant." "Insignificant?" I snapped. "Jessica, you were already flirting with him by that point, weren't you? You were already crossing lines, and you didn't think this was worth mentioning?" She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I was stupid, okay? I wasn't thinking. I didn't realize how wrong it was until later." Her words felt like a slap. "How many chances have I given you to come clean?" I asked, my voice breaking. "How many times have I asked if there was anything else I should know? And now, after all this, I find out about Clearwater from him? Not you?" "I'm sorry," she cried. "I didn't want to hurt you more than I already have." "You don't get to decide that," I said coldly. "You don't get to decide what I can handle or what I deserve to know." Jessica reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't give up on us." I stood, pacing the room as anger and heartbreak battled for control. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," I said finally. "I've given you chance after chance, and you keep proving I can't trust you." Jessica sat frozen, her face crumpling as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'll do anything," she said, her voice barely audible. "Anything to fix this." I left the house that night, needing space to think. I drove aimlessly for hours, replaying the conversation in my mind. Jessica's tears had seemed genuine, but how many times had she cried before, only to reveal another secret later? How many more lies were lurking, waiting to surface? By the time I returned to my apartment, I felt drained, physically, emotionally, mentally. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, wondering how much more of this I could take. I'd wanted to believe we could rebuild our marriage, but the foundation felt too cracked, too unstable. For the first time since the affair came to light, I found myself seriously considering the possibility of walking away. The following days were a haze of uncertainty. Jessica texted me constantly, apologizing, pleading, and promising she told me everything this time. I ignored most of her messages. I didn't have the energy to respond, and honestly, I didn't know what I would even say. Every time I thought about the Clearwater trip, and how I'd learned about it from Ryan instead of her, it felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. One night, I finally broke down and called my best friend, Mike. He'd been supportive but cautious throughout this whole ordeal, letting me vent without pushing me one way or another. When I explained what had happened with the Clearwater revelation, he let out a low whistle. "Man, that's rough," he said. "I mean, it's one thing to make a mistake. It's another to keep hiding stuff after you've already been caught." "Exactly," I said, pacing my apartment. "How am I supposed to believe anything she says when every week there's something new? It's like the lies never end." Mike was quiet for a moment before speaking. "You've done everything you could, dude. You gave her a chance. Hell, you gave her several chances. At some point, you've got to ask yourself if this is worth the pain." I stopped pacing, his words hitting me harder than I expected. Was it worth the pain? Was trying to salvage our marriage doing more harm than good? Despite my doubts, I agreed to meet Jessica one last time. We arranged to talk at the house while Lily was at my mom's, giving us the privacy we needed. When I arrived, Jessica looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red and puffy, her hair disheveled. She was holding a manila envelope in her hands, which she set on the table as I sat down. "What's this?" I asked, nodding toward the envelope. "Everything," she said quietly. "Every receipt, every text, every email from the time I met Ryan until now. I've spent the last few days going through everything and putting it all together. I want you to see for yourself that there's nothing else." I hesitated, my skepticism warring with a flicker of hope. "Why now?" I asked. "Why didn't you do this months ago?" "Because I was scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I realized that if I want any chance of fixing this, I have to stop being afraid. I have to give you the whole truth, even if it hurts." I opened the envelope and began sifting through the contents. True to her word, it was a comprehensive account of everything, their initial texts, the progression of their affair, and even a letter Jessica had written explaining how and why it had all happened. It was overwhelming, but it also felt like the first real act of accountability she'd taken since this nightmare began. After hours of reading and questioning, I closed the envelope and looked at Jessica. She was sitting across from me, wringing her hands and waiting for me to speak. "Why didn't you do this sooner?" I asked again, my tone softer this time. "Because I didn't think you'd stay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And maybe I didn't deserve for you to stay." Her honesty caught me off guard. For the first time, it felt like she truly understood the gravity of her actions, not just the pain she'd caused me, but the damage she'd done to herself, to our family, to the trust that had once defined our marriage. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally. "And even if I can, I don't know if I'll ever trust you again." Jessica nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I understand," she said. "But I'll keep trying, even if it takes the rest of my life. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." That night, I sat in my apartment and weighed my options. Jessica had finally laid everything bare, but was it too late? The thought of rebuilding our marriage felt daunting, almost impossible. But the thought of walking away felt equally heavy. Lily deserved a stable home, and deep down, I still loved Jessica, even if that love was buried under layers of anger and betrayal. I made a list, something I hadn't done since my college days. On one side, I wrote the reasons to stay: Lily, our history, the glimmers of hope I'd seen in Jessica's recent efforts. On the other side, I wrote the reasons to leave: the lies, the betrayal, the emotional toll of staying. The list didn't give me a clear answer, but it helped me realize something important. I wasn't ready to give up yet. Not entirely. The next morning, I called Jessica. "We're going to try," I said. "But it's going to be on my terms, and it's going to take time. A lot of time." Jessica let out a shaky breath. "I'll take whatever I can get," she said. "Thank you." We agreed to continue counseling and to take things one day at a time. Jessica moved into the guest room, giving us both space to process and rebuild at our own pace. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it felt like the right one, for now. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of cautious optimism. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but at least we were finally on the same path. The days that followed our decision to try again were filled with awkward silences and tentative steps toward normalcy. Jessica moved into the guest room as agreed, and we began setting boundaries and routines that would allow us to coexist without overwhelming each other. It felt like we were two strangers sharing the same house, both trying to navigate a sea of broken trust. Our counseling sessions became the cornerstone of our attempts to rebuild. Dr. Harris continued to guide us through difficult conversations, pushing us to confront the underlying issues in our marriage. One session, in particular, stood out. "Let's talk about forgiveness," Dr. Harris said, her calm voice cutting through the tension. "What does forgiveness look like for both of you? And is it something you feel is achievable?" Jessica spoke first. "For me, forgiveness means being given the chance to show that I've changed," she said, her voice trembling. "It means being able to prove that I can be better." I stared at the floor, struggling to find the words. "Forgiveness feels impossible right now," I admitted. "Every time I think I'm moving forward, I get reminded of what happened. It's like I'm stuck in this loop of anger and doubt." Dr. Harris nodded. "That's a natural response," she said. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or pretending the pain didn't happen. It's about finding a way to move forward without letting that pain control you. And that takes time, sometimes a lot of it." Hearing those words was both comforting and daunting. It gave me permission to feel what I was feeling, but it also underscored how much work lay ahead. One evening, after a particularly good counseling session, Jessica suggested we have dinner together as a family. "Just something small," she said. "I think it might be good for Lily to see us spending time together." I agreed, and we made Lily's favorite meal, spaghetti with meatballs. The three of us sat around the table, laughing as Lily recounted a story from school about a lizard that escaped its terrarium and caused chaos in the classroom. For the first time in months, it felt like we were a family again. After dinner, Jessica and I cleaned up together. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable for once. It was almost peaceful. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly. "It felt normal." "Yeah," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "It did." It wasn't much, but it was a start. A few weeks later, Jessica asked if we could start spending time together without Lily. "Just us," she said. "Like a date, but without the pressure." I hesitated. The idea of being alone with her, without the buffer of counseling or Lily, felt daunting. But I knew we couldn't rebuild our relationship without taking risks. "Okay," I said finally. "But let's keep it simple." We went for a walk in the park where we'd had our first date years ago. The familiarity of the setting brought back memories of a time when everything felt easy between us. Jessica was quiet at first, but as we walked, she began to open up. "I've been thinking a lot about why I did what I did," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I realized it wasn't just about feeling lonely or unnoticed. It was about me not liking who I'd become. I was looking for an escape, and I chose the worst possible way to find it." Her words caught me off guard. For so long, I'd been focused on my own pain that I hadn't considered the self-loathing she must have been dealing with. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I felt like I wasn't a good wife or a good mom," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "And instead of facing those feelings, I ran away from them. I let myself believe that someone else could fix what was wrong inside me." Her honesty hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't forgive her, not yet, but for the first time, I felt like I understood her a little better. A few days after our walk, Jessica surprised me with a letter. "I know we've done the letter thing before," she said, handing it to me. "But I wanted to put everything I'm feeling into words." I took the envelope and opened it, my heart pounding. The letter was raw and vulnerable, filled with apologies and reflections on the choices she'd made. She wrote about her regret, her desire to make things right, and her commitment to being a better partner and mother. But the part that stood out the most was this: "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I may never earn back your trust. But I'm willing to spend the rest of my life trying. Even if it's just to show Lily what it means to take responsibility for your mistakes." I folded the letter and set it on the table, my emotions a jumble of anger, sadness, and cautious hope. Jessica watched me nervously, waiting for a reaction. "Thank you," I said finally. "That means a lot." It wasn't much, but it was the most I could offer in that moment. The next counseling session felt different. For the first time, I felt like we were making real progress. Jessica opened up about her guilt and the steps she was taking to rebuild her own sense of self-worth, while I talked about the fear of being hurt again and the struggle to let go of my anger. Dr. Harris praised us for our honesty. "This is what rebuilding looks like," she said. "It's messy and painful, but it's also necessary." As we left the session, Jessica reached for my hand. I hesitated but didn't pull away. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. The weeks that followed were a delicate balancing act. Jessica and I were slowly learning how to navigate the fragile terrain of our relationship, building trust one cautious step at a time. The pain of her betrayal was still there, like a scar that would never fully fade, but it didn't dominate my thoughts the way it once did. Our counseling sessions became more productive, shifting from discussions of the past to plans for the future. Dr. Harris encouraged us to focus on shared goals, things we could work toward together as a family. We started small, planning a weekend trip with Lily, creating routines that gave us quality time as a couple, and setting boundaries to protect the progress we were making. Our first big step came in the form of a weekend getaway to a cabin by the lake. It was something we'd talked about doing for years but had always put off. This time, I insisted we make it happen. Lily was thrilled, bouncing with excitement as we packed the car. Jessica was nervous, her hands trembling as she double-checked the supplies. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" she asked as we loaded the last of the bags. "It's worth a try," I said, offering her a small smile. "Let's just focus on making it a good trip for Lily." The cabin was cozy and quiet, surrounded by trees that swayed gently in the breeze. We spent the days fishing, hiking, and playing board games by the fire. For the first time in what felt like forever, we laughed together, not forced or strained, but genuinely. One night, after Lily had gone to bed, Jessica and I sat on the porch, watching the stars. The silence between us felt peaceful, not awkward. She turned to me, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the moonlight. "Thank you," she said, "for giving me this chance. For giving us this chance." I nodded, the weight of her words settling over me. "I'm not doing it just for you," I said honestly. "I'm doing it for Lily. For us. And for me." Jessica reached for my hand, and this time, I didn't hesitate to take it. A few weeks after the trip, Jessica did something that caught me completely off guard. She had started writing again, journals, letters, even short essays, as a way to process her emotions and hold herself accountable. One evening, she handed me a folder filled with her writing. "I want you to read this," she said, her voice shaking. "It's everything I've been thinking and feeling since all of this started. I want you to see the work I'm doing, even if it's messy." I spent hours going through her words, my emotions swinging wildly between anger, sadness, and cautious hope. She wrote about her guilt, her shame, and her commitment to rebuilding herself, not just for me, but for herself and Lily. One passage stood out above all the others. "I can't change the past, and I can't undo the pain I've caused. But I can choose to learn from it. I can choose to be better, not because it will fix everything, but because it's the right thing to do." For the first time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began: forgiveness. Months turned into a year, and slowly but surely, our lives began to feel less fractured. Jessica and I were far from perfect. We still had moments of tension, lingering doubts, and the occasional argument. But we'd also rediscovered the reasons we fell in love in the first place. One evening, as we were putting Lily to bed, she hugged us both tightly and said, "I'm glad we're all together again." Her words hit me like a lightning bolt, reminding me of what we were fighting for. Jessica and I still attended counseling, and we kept our lines of communication open in a way we hadn't before. We talked about our fears, our hopes, and even our setbacks. The journey wasn't linear, but it was ours, and we were walking it together. Looking back on everything, I can't say that I'm grateful for what happened. It's not the kind of experience anyone should have to endure. But I've learned things about myself, about Jessica, and about relationships that I wouldn't have understood otherwise. Trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild. But with effort, commitment, and a willingness to face the hard truths, it can be mended, if not to its original state, then to something stronger in its own way. To anyone who finds themselves in a situation like mine, my advice is this: take your time. Don't rush to make decisions or to forgive. Let yourself feel everything, the anger, the pain, the sadness, and then decide what's right for you. There's no one-size-fits-all answer, but there is hope, even in the darkest moments. One evening, as Jessica and I sat on the couch watching Lily play with her toys, I realized something. Our marriage wasn't what it used to be, but it was still worth fighting for. We weren't just rebuilding, we were creating something new. Something imperfect but real. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because we were choosing each other again, one day at a time. And that was enough.